Welcome. In this lecture, we're going to talk about Chapter 3, Part 2, and we're going to focus on timbre and instruments of the orchestra. The harp. The harp is a very important instrument that's found in the orchestra, and it's definitely an instrument that comes out in the Romantic period and certainly the 20th century. It's kind of a staple by the mid part of the Romantic period. It's a traditional folk instrument. It's found throughout the world. It's definitely added to the orchestral ensembles, and lots of times the harp is used for color and effect. Okay, one of the main ways that we use the harp in orchestral music is for playing arpeggios in the background. The harp does a great job of playing arpeggios. And an arpeggio basically is playing a chord, but instead of having all the notes sound at one time, it basically is breaking them up. Another thing that the harp does is sometimes it adds effects to certain pivotal moments in orchestral pieces. And one effect that the harp adds is called a glissando. And that's basically rapidly sliding up or down the entire scale. Let's listen to what a glissando sounds like. And that's the sound of a harp. The woodwinds. So the first two instruments we're going to look at in the woodwind family is the flute and the clarinet. So the flute, obviously, the air blown is across the straight edge of a flute. Okay, they're made of metal these days. Used to be made of wood. Nowadays they're all made of metal. The flute is a very agile instrument, and it's definitely it's up in the higher range with the orchestra. Now we also have the piccolo, and the piccolo is a cousin of the flute. It's a smaller version of it, and since the piccolo is smaller, it's going to produce higher sounding notes. So let's first off, we're going to listen to a flute scale. Let's listen to that. And next, let's listen to the flute play a melody. The next instrument is the piccolo. And again, the piccolo is that smaller kind of cousin of the flute. Therefore, it's going to be a higher sounding instrument. Let's listen to the piccolo play a scale. And now let's listen to the piccolo play a melody. Again, it's very, very high up there, has like a kind of a piercing kind of sound. The next instrument in the woodwind family we'll look at is the clarinet. The clarinet is pictured here on the right. It's an air blown through, it's a single reed instrument, so the mouthpiece actually has a reed that you blow in, and the reed vibrates, which helps create some of this, creates the sounds. It has a very, very mellow, smooth sound. Let's go listen to the scale of a clarinet. And now let's listen to the clarinet play a melody. Next, we'll look at more woodwind instruments, but these two woodwind instruments are called double reed wind instruments. And the oboe and the bassoon, the reason why they're called double reed instruments is because they have two reeds together in their mouthpiece that vibrate back and forth. So the oboe, we'll look at the air is blown through this double reed, and that double reed creates kind of this nasally, exotic sound. we also have the English horn, which is also a variation or a cousin of the oboe as well. So let's listen to the oboe play a scale and listen for that kind of nasally quality to the oboe. And now let's listen to the oboe play a melody. Next, we have the bassoon. Now, the bassoon is one of the lowest woodwind instruments we have. The air balloon is through a double reed as well. It's kind of the base of the woodwind family. We also have another instrument called the contrabassoon, and that's a version of the bassoon that's larger, and that's going to be the lowest of the wind instruments. So let's go listen to the scale of a bassoon. Brass instruments. So this section will look at the brass instruments of the orchestra: the French horn, the trombone, the trumpet, and the tuba. And one of the things that makes this group of instruments, one of the things that's similar about them is the fact that they produce sounds through blowing through this cup-shaped mouthpiece. And you can see the mouthpiece right here it's listed. All these instruments definitely have a mouthpiece to them. So continuing talking about the brass instruments, we're going to look at the trumpet, the French horn, the trombone, and the tuba. So let's start with the trumpet. The trumpet is kind of the soprano or the highest instrument in the brass family. It has a very, very brilliant sound. It's very, very bright and can be powerful. So let's hear the trumpet playing a scale. And now, let's listen to the trumpet playing a melody. Now, one thing that brass instruments will do and can do is they can be played using what's called a mute. And a mute is a cylindrical device that they would put in the bell of their instruments. So you can have mutes for French horns, trumpets, trombones, tubas, and there's a wide array of different styles of mutes. The typical ones would be like a harmony mute or a straight mute. So we have an example here of that same melody with the trumpet, but instead of playing it without a mute, it's going to be played with a straight mute. Let's listen. And as you can see, the notes are the same, but the quality of the sound is different. And that's the purpose of a mute. The mute's to do two things. It's going to change the quality of the sound of the timbre, and it will also kind of dampen the sound as well. Next, let's listen to the French horn. And the French horn is going to be, it's probably the most iconic instrument. It has a cylindrical kind of shape to it with a big bell on the end. It's mainly associated with hunting and the mountains. Back in the day, it was a hunting instrument, and then of course during the Baroque era, it gets brought into the orchestral realm. So I have an example here of a French horn playing a scale. Let's listen. Continuing, let's talk about the trombone. Now, the trombone, similar range to the trumpet. Similar range to the French horn. But with the trombone, though, it's a little bit different because the pitches are changed by having a slide going in and out, which will change the length of the piping or tubing. Okay, it's a medium to full kind of sounding range, and the trombones kind of can be like the tenor of the brass section. Let's go listen. I have an example of a scale here. And now I have an example of the trombone playing a melody. And as you can see towards the end of it, he kind of can slide right into that note or bend right up into it. And that's an idiomatic trait of the trombone. Finally, we have the tuba. Now, the tuba is going to be the largest of the brass instruments, and it's the lowest of the brass instruments, the lowest sounding. Obviously, the bigger the instrument, the lower the sound. So let's go listen to a tuba playing a scale. And let's listen to the tuba playing a melody. Next, we have the percussion section. Now, the percussion section comes about in the orchestra. In the classical period, we start to see the timpani be a staple instrument in the classical period. And then towards the end of the classical period, we start to see cymbals, triangles being added. And then by the time we get to the 19th century, the Romantic period, the percussion section, it's an established section. And composers are using the percussion for that extra timbre element to it. Now, we group percussion instruments into two categories. We group them into pitched instruments and then non-pitched instruments. So instruments like the timpani seen here, that's going to be a pitched instrument. So when you play those drums, it's going to produce a specific pitch. In fact, you can actually change the timpani's pitch, but the timpani has a kind of a pedal, and the pedal's attached to the drum. And when you press the pedal, it can either tighten or loosen that drum head, thus changing the pitch. And notice when you see timpani or kettle drums, they're usually in pairs of two. In the classical period, lots of times the timpani was tuned to the tonic and dominant notes of a symphony, and they'd be playing on important parts of the tonic and dominant notes. So let's listen to the timpani. One other note is the timpani is usually played with mallets as well. Now, a second set of instruments we'll look at with percussion instruments are non-pitched percussion. Now, these non-pitched instruments, like the snare drum, the bass drum, and the cymbals, they're going to make a sound, but they don't have a definitive pitch. Okay, like the cymbals have a crash, but there's no pitch associated with it. Wood blocks as well, might not have a specific pitch. So let's go listen to these three instruments. The first is going to be the snare drum, popular in bands and in marching bands and so forth. Let's listen. Next, we have the bass drum. Again, it's a very large cylindrical drum played with a mallet. and it doesn't have a pitch, but it definitely has a low kind of pulse, and it's usually played at the big moments of like an orchestral piece. And then finally, we have the cymbals. Cymbals can be two metal cymbals using crashing together, and it's usually done at specific big events in an orchestral piece. Let's listen. The piano. The piano is probably one of the most popular instruments we have today. It's probably one of the instruments that we're most familiar with. You know, it produces a sound by when you press the key, and a hammer actually hits the strings in the back, makes a sound, and then when you lift the strings up, or you lift the keys up, there's a damper that dampens the strings. Now, with the piano, though, it's important to know that the piano, you can play loud notes, soft notes, and a wide range of dynamics. And that's not true of other keyboard instruments. Let's listen to the piano. The harpsichord. Now, the harpsichord is going to be another keyboard instrument that we will come into contact with in this class. It definitely comes out in the Baroque era. And the harpsichord, even though it's similar to a piano, it might look like it's different, okay? The difference is there's no dynamic range with a harpsichord. And the second difference is the fact that when you press a key on the harpsichord, the strings are getting plucked, whereas a piano, the strings are actually getting struck. So that it's going to have a different quality of sound to it as well. Let's go listen to what a harpsichord sounds like. Pipe organ. The organ's a great instrument. It's very, very versatile and has a lot of timbres associated with the organ. Now, it produces the sounds by air going through a series of pipes. And keep in mind, you can see an organ here and you see a couple sets of pipes. Lots of times if you go to a church, you won't see these sets of pipes because they're actually built into the infrastructure. Okay, and some of them are like 30 to 40 feet long, depending on, okay? The longer the pipes, the lower the sounds. The smaller the pipes, the higher the sounds. Remember that. So all these different pipes are set in groups, and each of these groups of pipes will create different timbres. So as an organist, you have a wide array of different colors that you can play with, okay? Now, if you look at this organ here, you'll see there are several different keyboards. Okay, the keyboards are actually called manuals, so you can play on different manuals and have each manual could be assigned a different set of pipes to have a different timbre. Secondly, if you see on the side, there's all these buttons here and over here. Well, they're called stops. Okay, those tiny knobs, and when you push and pull in specific stops, what you're doing is you're changing the airflow through these series of pipes, thus changing the timbre available to you. Another thing that we want to look at and be mindful of when we have the organ is, if you look below, it has a series of pedals. Okay, and the pedals to a pipe organ, they don't function like the pedal of the piano. Okay. If you looked at the organ pedals, it's going to look kind of like a big keyboard. So when you're playing the manuals or the keyboards up here with your hands, many organists will be playing another layer of sound or with their feet as well, which makes the organ a great instrument for playing counterpoint. Let's go listen and see what the pipe organ sounds like. The conductor. So the conductor definitely is a person who's responsible for leading the orchestra. Most all symphony orchestras throughout the country or throughout the world definitely have a conductor for them. And the role of the conductor is kind of analogous to a coach. They're responsible for choosing the specific music that they're going to be playing on each concert. They're also responsible for interpreting how the music should feel, how fast the tempo should go, how loud it should be. They're responsible for rehearsing the musicians. Okay, what happens when the conductor goes out, they'll see the book of music in front of them, and that book is called an orchestral score. Okay, and most times conductors will conduct from the orchestral score as well. Another thing I always point out is, if you can see here in the picture, the conductor he's holding a baton. Okay, it's not called a stick and so forth. It's called a baton. And the idea is when he's conducting with the baton just gives the orchestra better visibility. Okay, so if you're a violinist in the way in the back or a bass in the back or so forth, you can see the conductor's gestures and you'll be able to follow along by looking at his baton. In this slide, we can see the typical setup of an orchestra. So if we were sitting in the audience looking at a stage, we would see the conductor who's here in the center. And then the violins, the first and second violins, they're grouped in two groups, would be off to the left. And then the violas and cellos are off to the right. The double basses are in the back. And of course, the woodwinds usually are in the center. And please note that the brass is behind everybody, okay? And that's done for good reason, because the brass can actually project way out through the strings and the woodwinds. And then the percussion, like your timpanis and the bass drums, they're all the way towards the back of the orchestra. So this concludes Chapter 3, Part 2, looking at orchestral instruments.